Hello and welcome to the Stories of Innovation, a podcast by World Vision International Nepal, and I'm your host Utsap Karel. In this episode, we will be dwelling upon the theme of innovating in fragile context. For today's discussion, we have got guest Dhuha Abdulmunem, who is the Response Innovation Lab Lead at Iraq. Okay, hi Dhuha, welcome to Stories of Innovation.
Hi. Thank you, Ustad, for hosting me. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for your time, and finally we had a chance to, catch up virtually after quite a while.
Yeah. Thank God that we have that opportunity.
Absolutely. This is the beauty of technology, right?
Yeah.
And in today's episode, we'll be talking quite a lot around technology and innovation, of course. So, since this is the podcast about the stories of innovation, all the powerful innovation happening in unlikely place, because most of the time when people hear about the word innovation or something happening, then people think, it's a Silicon Valley or it's some fancy big cities, right? And today we are really, really excited to know more about all the cool innovations happening in a country like Iraq. And that's why we'd like to start with more around behind the scenes story of the Iraq Response Innovation Lab itself. Tell us more around how it came into existence and what were the founding philosophies and, all the cool stories, how it came into the picture.
So, Iraq Response Innovation Lab was initially launched in the early 2019, and the basic premise behind it is that the humanitarian aid world has been mostly relying on traditional methods to tackle a lot of the challenges and the issues that are within the country. However, it's in terms of effectiveness and whatnot, it's you can't continue to use the same method over and over to achieve good results. And so the aid world has to adopt, and it also has to innovate to find new, interesting ways to achieve better and more effective impact. So the idea behind it is that we have a hub that is able to basically read into the context and to develop innovative ways to deal with the challenges and to get these innovative solutions from abroad and from within the country. So the way that we've been operating is that we act as a link between the challenges and between the solutions. And in the early days of the Iraq Response Innovation Lab, we more or less focused on global innovations and how they can fit in within the context.
Right.
However, from some experiences and also from engaging with different people, we saw that there is actually a quite good amount of innovation that is coming from within the country. And innovation as creative problem solving is something that exists innately within the people, mostly because of the tremendous amount of challenges that they have been facing across the years. So we've had more or less of a pivotal point where we decided to shift our focus to localized innovation
Right.
and to instead of proposing the challenge outward, we talk about the challenges inward within the country and to engage creative people and innovators that have more concrete solutions and that have solutions that are much more in line with the context of Iraq. And so that was something that we started doing more effectively in 2020. It was something we continue to do until today. But one of the main things that we've kind of struggled with, I would say, is the concept of innovation. As you mentioned, everybody thinks Silicon Valley, everybody thinks, like hard tech. But at the same
Right.
time, innovation can be within a different way to do a process, can be a product that is non-traditional, but not necessarily technological. It's more or less just problem solving within the tools that you have, whether they're inside the country or tools that you can bring from outside. So that's honestly one of the biggest challenges that we've struggled with, even when it comes to engaging people to support innovation in Iraq. So I don't know if you know this, but one of our biggest points of focus has been agriculture and agribusiness in Iraq, because
Right.
um, the country is, especially now, is struggling a lot with the drought and food security. So innovation becomes much more crucial at this point. And so when you talk about innovation in agriculture, everybody thinks, oh, sensors and smart irrigation and whatnot. And while this is a very important thing as well, there are also other more, less techy
Right.
and ways to tackle that. And we've supported some of these projects. Luckily, we've had the opportunity to reach the correct people and to support them to establish their innovative agribusinesses. And even until today, we still focus much on agribusiness and how to use the existing tools, tech or non-tech, to improve the status quo and to tackle the challenges more effectively.
I think this is quite a beautiful way of portraying, like how the innovation journey has been for you guys so far. And when you're talking about, like agribusiness and helping people with powerful, innovative tool to address those challenges, then, like when people hear about the word innovation and what we exactly do, then it's not that glamorous, right? Like whenever people hear about the word innovation, oh, it's AI or it's a blockchain or, like cool mobile app that is going to, like solve the problem. But we are talking about something which is not that glamorous. And, how do you basically convince people, because innovation brings changes, right? And people are not always ready to accept those changes. And yeah, everybody loves innovation. Let's innovate, right? But at the same time, when the innovation brings change, people are like, why would we need something new if this thing is already working? So how are you, like positioning yourself in terms of convincing people that, like this is a good innovation or this is something, you need to go with? How do you do that?
So this is actually one of the most important things that we think about when we try to evaluate an innovation. Is it tackling a challenge? Because like you mentioned, if something is already working, it might be difficult to convince others to just go with this new method. But we are reaching to levels where the status quo is not sustainable anymore. And while this is an unfortunate thing, it's also a good entry point for innovation. So let me give you one of the examples for the projects that we have supported. It's production of green barley through using of hydroponics and solar panels.
Right.
So, in a if you look at it honestly from a global perspective, we're not the first people to do it in the world, but
Mm-hmm.
in Iraq, it's quite something that is outside of the ordinary, because people are used to having generators. They're used to just, using water in the field, but that's a luxury that we don't have anymore. And,
Absolutely.
so that's why it's important to think of innovations that are able to tackle the several challenges that are affecting agriculture. And the best way to convince people is actually by demonstrating results. So when the innovator, actually started production, he had his first batch, and he showed it to the people in the area and whatnot. He was able to, on his own, able to get much traction and attention, because it's not theoretical. It's not something on paper. It's something that exists on the ground. And this is one of the main things that we try to focus on in terms of supporting, if we're selecting projects to be supported, is how can they actually influence people on the ground, and how do you frame the innovation in a way that people are like, okay, this is not exactly tech or mobile or whatnot, but this is new. This is a creative solution for the challenge that we have. When it comes to tech, for example, this is actually something we'd love to integrate more into the country, but unfortunately, we have to be realistic when it comes to the technical capacity. and the restrictions that we have on the ground. So while there are so many e-commerce applications and whatnot, the technology and the ability to maintain and sustain these applications or these tech platforms is quite limited, and people in Iraq are still learning and developing. And I'm expecting in the future there is going to be more of an influx there. But facts remain: not everyone has access to a mobile. Not everyone has access to a internet connection, and the digital gap actually, or and within Iraq, is quite interesting because you have people that might have a phone, but they're not able to read or write. And so, how do you use technology to reach them through your phone? In terms of gender, there's also a gap when it comes to access technology and whatnot. But that doesn't mean we should stop innovating, and there are multiple ways to do that.
I think that's the brilliant way of portraying how innovation works in such a fragile context. Especially, I like your statement that in order to convince people that innovation really works, so we have to deliver the result. I think that's the beautiful way of putting things together. Like when we talk about innovation, then we know it fails, right?
Right.
Many times because it's an experiment, right? People think it's a fully polished product, but it's more like an iterative process. We continuously improvise, we learn from it. And as you mentioned in the earlier part of this conversation, that you started by looking into some of the promising global technologies and bringing in country like Iraq, and then trying to address some of the local problems. So tell us more about that experience because you pivoted more now by focusing on the local innovations, right? So tell us about that experience of tapping into the international knowledge or the global knowledge expertise, the process, and trying to basically put it together so that it can address the local challenge. And what were the challenge in addressing the challenge itself?
So, as we're looking at examining a lot of the global innovations, especially those that have been researched and prototyped and even piloted at several parts of the world, more or less, I would say they were developed for different contexts, and they were developed for a specific set of challenges, which is important for the design process. So, when you try to bring those things into here, you might not have the ability to localize this innovation. So you are technically relying still on external actors to provide you with the raw material to do the activity. And second, it's the context here is changing
Hmm.
frequently. So we look at access to water, for example.
Right.
Uh, the issue of drought has like a multitude of challenges. You have water for farming, for people, and also for livestock.
Right.
And a lot of the innovations that have existed so far have been focusing on human consumption. But at the same time, the issue here is more or less of a affecting the different sectors as well. Access to water for drinking might not be the most prominent, but doesn't mean it's not an issue. But it's also the solutions are more or less catered to either one of those. And again, it's the thing that we always have to consider is if we introduce the solution, is it going to be sustainable? Are we able to scale it locally? Because, COVID happened and it really messed up the supply chain globally. Cannot
Right.
rely on things that exist only outside and to hope for the supply chain not to be disturbed and to have a continuous flow. And also at the same time, when you look at solutions that are being developed internally, you might see that there is someone in here has already developed something similar. So it's best to, not best, it's more logical and sustainable to focus on the existing capacities here than it is to bring something from outside. So an example is for the barley sprouting, kind of sticking into that because it's kind of
Right.
very thick. You can buy a barley sprouting unit completely full and export it from another country. The cost is like triple the amount or quadruple the amount that it would take for make it locally here. And you would also have to rely on providers from another country and whatnot. But if you have someone here who thought about it and studied it and has the blueprint on how to conduct it here, so it's more logical and sustainable to invest in the person that is doing it here. And also for this particular example, the first batch of production also had a lot of challenges. And
Right.
there was like 3 or 4 pilots of test until he was able to produce something full and to start selling in the market. Um, but what's also important to work on is to the emotional resilience of the innovator as well, because a lot of people unfortunately give up at some point.
Right. Right. Right.
And it's but it's important to keep the end goal and the impact at your mind as you're going through the rough patches.
Absolutely. I really like this word, emotional resilience of the local innovators, because it can be really frustrating, right? Because it requires a lot of iteration and, of course, failure is something, we should celebrate. That's what we call. But at the same time, we know deep down the heart that it really hurts when you fail. And when you're talking about maintaining the emotional resilience of the local innovators, I just want to connect this with something like you guys have been working quite a lot with incredibly brilliant local innovators, right? And you already mentioned about how to keep them motivated so that we all are in the same pace of solving some of the pressing problem we all are facing. So can you give us example of one of that successful innovator? I know like there are many, and if you, I think like you will be thinking, oh, there are like quite a lot. But if you want to give one example, or if you have to take one name of the local innovation that has really made a difference after a lot of, like blood, sweats, and tears during the process.
Um, hmm, Let me see. Which one was the most dramatic process? I mean, to be honest, they all had a bit of ups and downs.
All right.
But I'm going to talk about an ongoing process because the issue is more or less yet to be resolved. So one of the innovators that we have supported is in Diwani, a city all the way to the south of the country.
Right.
And his proposed innovation is a farmer field school, which focuses on biopesticides and using, natural solutions instead of going through chemicals. Because the governorate is facing a lot of difficulties with the misuse of chemical processes, and
Right.
also the area has a lack of existing services for farmers. And so he started off with focusing on specific crops and specific ways of irrigation and whatnot. And in the past couple of months, the access to water has dramatically changed, and it's really affected his ability to work with the farmers, because unfortunately much of them have stopped farming momentarily to see where it's going. So what he's doing right now, which is really quite impressive, is that he's doing alongside with his trainers an extensive research on how to make the farming in the city right now more resource efficient in
Right.
terms of water. So a social, like, okay, this is not needed at the moment. Let me try and provide something that is needed. Let me do my homework and see what else I can provide that can help the city. And he also shifted a bit of his business model to focus outside of class and more into customized services to existing farms that are within the vicinity as well.
Right.
And this is like this particular innovator, I would say he's one of the most self-motivated innovators that we've seen so far. And especially when it comes to his, you know, something happened, what can I do to solve this? And not
Right.
like okay, let me just see what happens. And that's one of the attitudes. And I would have to say, like, we didn't exactly build that within the innovator. It was already innate.
Right.
Uh, but that's basically the much of the resilience that we're looking for, and we hope to continue to grow within innovators.
Perfect. I think this is a really brilliant example of like how innovators are doing more fluid work, right? Instead of just sticking in the original plan, they are just tweaking bits and pieces
Yeah.
around the business model, around the methodology itself, because the problems are ongoing, and how to adapt and become more uh, resilient is something that is there. So, like for most of our listener who are unaware of some of the cool things you guys have been doing, like like the matchmaking and convening and those kind of bits, because that's how you bring in a lot of innovators, right, like local talents, and then connect with the humanitarian world, and also support them with like different technical tools, with different fundings and different resources. Tell us more about like how do you get all these cool innovators, and then how do you connect them with those people who are looking for a solution, the demand side and the supply side of this process.
So in terms of this process, I would say as Iraq Response Innovation Lab, we're kind of different from the rest of the response innovation labs.
Right.
Follow a method which is like an incubation process.
Mm-hmm.
And within the incubation, we basically have a problem statement. These are the challenges that we're looking for. If you have innovative ideas, please submit them to us.
Right.
And we have an open call for application, and people submit their ideas. More or less, I'd have to be realistic. Not all of the ideas are very clear, like, oh yeah, this is innovative. Sometimes it's just like tons of ideas here and there, and it's
Right.
up to you well to talk to the people and to dig more into the process. And then we go through initial evaluation process, and they join within the incubation. From there, they go through uh, technical training related to the topic itself, and we go into business model training and more. That's when you start asking the innovators questions like, how is this innovative? How is this going to generate impact? Do you have people? Do you know the amount of people that actually need this? And these three questions continue until they have a developed concept node or a business model for the idea. And then we go through a process of pitching for a judging committee, and the most impactful, realistic, innovative projects proceed to receive seed funding.
Right. So that's
Yes.
how the journey starts. And
Yes.
walk us through more about the scaling process, right? Like they start as with the seed fund, a bit of piloting, right? And in order to maximize the impact at the local level, I'm sure like there are certain processes of scaling that up. Learning from the like all the best practices that happen during the pilot process, and then scaling it for the greater benefit for the people we aim to cater, especially the most vulnerable people in these fragile settings.
So when it comes to scale up, I would say that the situation or the context in Iraq is a little bit tricky. When it
Right.
comes to supporting for ideas in general, there's a quite some number of actors that support within the ideation process, us being some of them. And there are other actors that support within the scale up, but they usually have metrics that are specific to the size of the company and whatnot. And unfortunately, here in Iraq, there's a bit of gap in the transition phase
Right.
between an pilot startup and a
Mm-hmm.
mature enterprise.
Right.
And right now, these are some of the things that we're trying to tackle, and to see where within the ecosystem we can link people up with the opportunities that exist elsewhere that can help them to scale up. Unfortunately, when it comes to investment or to growth of enterprises and whatnot, there are a few limitations. And I would have to say that the business atmosphere in Iraq is not exactly the most user-friendly.
Mm-hmm.
But many people are paying more attention into it, and we do hope that there is going to be a bit more support for this. When it comes to the humanitarian world, much of the actors are looking into scale up, more or less similar to the investment way. And for us internally, we're trying to basically have the concept and the evidence and to see how we can integrate this with future projects. Um, which takes me to another set of challenges,
Right.
unfortunately, is related to donor appetite.
Mm-hmm.
And so usually these innovations, the cost of setting them up is more expensive than a traditional method.
Right.
And comes to basically, how do I say it, to advertise or to advocate for innovation, like concrete innovations to be included within interventions, it's easier said than done.
Right.
And I think one of the main reasons for that is also that the concept of the innovation from a donor perspective is different from one to another.
Mm-hmm.
And while innovation is always considered to be a important part of a project from a donor perspective, it's not exactly easy to quantify what that means to them and
Right.
how to integrate those ideas into our company projects. And this has been one of the main challenges that we've been facing actually when it comes to scale up. So that's why we've been trying to look more into private sector actors and how we can match that within the existing agribusinesses or businesses that we've supported.
In general. Perfect. Because, like I am about to ask you more around the challenges because
Yeah.
it's really, really difficult, right? Because when we talk about innovation, then we all are excited. But when we implement all these innovation projects, then there are so many bottlenecks we need to address. And it's always challenging. There might be policy level challenges. There might be, like uptake from the community itself, because as you said, like there are so many social variables. For example, the gender related variables. Then we look into the poverty, we look into the education, the health side, as well as the capacity of some of the investors, as well as the private sector. So walk us through some of the, like key challenges you guys have been facing in this area. I'm sure you are doing like so many incredible things, as we can see from all the cool social media posts we have been seeing, really inspirational. So well done for that one. But at the same time, we know there are so many pain story behind the scene, and this might be the perfect platform to, like explore, like some of the challenges, maybe policy level you want to start with, and then we can go to the other one.
Well, like you mentioned, there's a huge amount, there's a mountain of challenges that exist, and I would categorize them as being internal related to the innovator itself and
Mm-hmm.
external to all of the factors surrounding it. And to go to the innovator, the internal one, I
Mm-hmm.
would say that this is one of the challenges that I've seen across the country. There's a lot of actors in the ecosystem that are supporting entrepreneurship, innovation, and whatnot. But the one of the main issues that we see is the preparedness of the person itself
Mm-hmm.
and how much they're going to invest in terms of time and effort and money in,
Mm-hmm.
in their proposed project. So this has been one of the key challenges that we've had to work with, because you're not tackling an idea, you're not suggesting something, you're working with an individual. An individual might have good days, might have bad days, might have external pressures, might have different motives
Absolutely.
for the project that they're working on. So
Mm-hmm.
that art alone has been quite a challenge. When it comes to external things, I would say that one of the biggest challenge is around the existence of the raw material or the technical capacity or the service providers in the market. And basically how to find the best material, how to support the innovator in accessing the best service providers and whatnot. And because our projects tends to be quite out of the ordinary, it becomes an additional challenge for us and the innovator to basically trust that the company that we're relying on, or the developer or whatnot, has the
Mm-hmm.
ability to do that. And
Right.
it had its ups and downs quite a lot, actually. And on a policy level, I would say that when it comes to registration and legality of of registering a prototype or an idea or whatnot, the laws and the overall scene is quite difficult to navigate, and which makes people less inclined to follow through with the procedure, especially when it comes to registrations and whatnot. And also, like, going back to donors and the humanitarian aid, and how much they're really investing in long-term innovations. It's quite fun and interesting to focus on the ideation and then delivering the seed fund, and that's it. But the much of our hard work and much of the challenges that we've seen actually come up after that, because
Right.
before the innovators, receive the seed funding, it's all, fun and theory and on paper and whatnot. But once you
Mm-hmm.
get working on the ground, and okay, the solar system didn't function correctly. The pipes, popped, and it did not do the
Right.
irrigation properly. People are not had different opinions and different ideas about service that are provided. All of this is where the momentum starts to drop a
Right.
little. And that's why, like, within our pipeline, we've supported, I would say, like, local innovators. Supported 8 or 9
Mm-hmm.
projects. But the amount of support that we provided them is for quite a long period of time, and it's the only way we've been able to see ourselves and them, is this actually effective or not? And I would
Right.
have to say, not everything we supported has been as effective as we thought of, but that's a
Mm-hmm.
part of learning.
Exactly. Because
Yeah.
we are also learning from the process, all right? Because we are like every situations are different, every innovators are different, right? And of course, like we love to help the community through these innovators as much as we can from all the technical support as well as financial resources. But since every problem has got a unique solution, and getting
Yeah.
that solution right with them together is always the challenging bit. Now, like since talking about innovation, we know like innovation fails, and there has been a lot of books written about why innovation fails, and like a lot of talks around it as well. For example, in country like Nepal or in South Asia, failures are not taken in a positive way, right?
Yeah.
Because you failed, that's so terrible, right? Instead of like providing that enabler to have that, as you mentioned, the like emotional resilience, right? So how is it like the failing culture, like the perception about failing in the uh, newly transitioning country like Iraq, like especially among the innovators? And also, like, is there an example of, like failure which you really want to share with us, so that, like we can all learn from that process itself?
So I would say I cannot share specific cases.
Details, definitely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that in the projects that we've seen fail, okay, well, it's important to, to follow up later on, but what's also important is the amount of data and amount of real information that you have about the project before you get started. An idea might look very, very glamorous on paper,
All right.
and the person presenting it might also know how to pitch correctly. But
Mm-hmm.
however, and you also have to probe into the market needs and into the gaps and see, does this really match, or does this really look cool? And that's why it's attractive to some actors and whatnot. So I would say this has been one of the biggest hurdles when it comes to success and failures of entrepreneurship in general, and innovation in specific. Is sometimes there is not enough research taking place on whether or not this is applicable, doable, or needed. Um, so when it comes to failure and the culture of failure in Iran, I would have to say it's also not very taken very positively, but it
Mm-hmm.
also goes back into the individual. So some
Right.
individuals fail and they try something else, or if they try to fix what failed and see what happened. I'm giving something general overall,
Right.
not specific to the context of IRIL, but you also have this more or less thought that to basically look at the external factors only and to say these were the defining things for my failure. And that's when it comes to building accountability and whatnot, this is also something more additional to be added to the emotional resilience, how we take accountability to our failures and think how I could have done to, what I could have done to avoid this failure. And I would have
Right.
to say, culturally speaking, there is more thinking outward than inward when it comes to failure. But
Mm-hmm.
again, it's very individual,
Individual.
uh, um, each case differently.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Also, like I've got $1 million question for you, all right? Because we ask everyone like what innovation means to you, right? Because, for example, for the donors, right, the concept or the word innovation or the notion of innovation is quite different than the innovators, and for us, it's a very different way we look into innovation. So, for you, how do you see innovation? Like what is your perception around innovation? Or to make it more plain question, like how do you define innovation?
So, innovation, I usually define it as creative problem solving. And
Mm-hmm.
unlike what most people say, it's about thinking outside of the box. I
Right.
think the box is very important
Absolutely.
because, yes, because the box tells you these are things that exist here, things that have worked so far.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the reasons why it's not working now. So it's very important to look at what's in here, see if you can tweak things inside, or if you need to bring something else, but they have to be compatible within
Absolutely.
what's in here. And that's one of the biggest issues I've seen when it comes to innovations coming from a global perspective, because what works in Europe might not work in Africa. And
Absolutely.
thinking too much outside of the box, sometimes you lose sight of context.
Right.
And when it comes to innovation, like from an Iraqi perspective, for me, innovation is when we didn't, when people didn't have access to places to buy bread, they looked for
Mm-hmm.
ways to make bread in their own houses.
Mm-hmm.
And when people didn't have, this is something like my mother has shared with me, people didn't have access to makeup, they
Mm-hmm.
would find ways to see from the remaining makeup that they have and whatnot to create new products. And
Right.
it's just a way for you to create what you need or what you want, given despite the difficulties
Right.
around it.
Right. That's why they say, right? Like necessity is the mother of all invention.
Yeah.
So when we talk about innovation, then we need to look more from the contextual perspective because context matters. That's why, like one of the beautiful example of contextual innovation for me is always the M-Pesa, right? The
Sure.
mobile money thing that started in Kenya because
Sure.
this was really beautiful story that always fascinated me when I was in university because it's not like someone said, hey, like we have got a solution for you and now you can use mobile money, right? It was more around the local telecom was seeing like how people were behaving with the mobile top up, right? So actually people looked into how they can transact with the mobile top up from their phone and like want to get away with all the security problems. And then like when the telecommunication company like Safaricom saw, okay, people were paying school fees using mobile top up because there was risk of carrying money, And then,
Yeah.
like, okay, the Safaricom started to, like legalize or make it more formal process. And that's how the mobile money came into existence. So when that became successful in Africa, in like Kenya and most of the sub-Saharan Africa, then like people wanted to try in other countries as well, in Afghanistan, in Bangladesh, in Nepal as well. But as you said in our earlier conversation, it is sometimes we try to import these cool things and want to make it cool here. For example, it didn't work in Nepal because there was like almost $1 million was spent in getting that technology running. But at the same time, like we didn't have that similar kind of problem, like, sending money from urban area to the local area from mobile phone, or, like the security concern. So people thought, okay, this is something which was actually imposed to them instead of the demand driven, right? So it was more like a supply driven, so it didn't work. So every time when I think about the contextual innovation, then it's always, like, M-Pesa comes into my mind, because it's more about, like observing what exactly some of the actors in the community are doing, and then trying to make more inclusive platforms so that people can perform better. So because I'm always curious to know more about the context, because context is always the king or queen, like however we want to say. Tell us more around, like some of the promising technologies, what we are seeing right now, like artificial intelligence, blockchain, like IoT, and all these cool things that's happening, even, like UAV or the drone technology, and how we can contextualize it so that we can enable the process, what is already happening, and make a difference in communities, so that, like people can have more easier way of doing things, more, like a better way of doing things.
Although like much of what I said is about how it's important to bring innovation from inside, but also
Mm-hmm.
as actors that are a part of the international NGO community, it's also important for us to see what are the existing technologies that are useful and try to streamline that within our activities. And like one of the main things that are quite interesting, and I think it's yet to be explored, is related to artificial intelligence, and
Mm-hmm.
basically how it can streamline, automate, and also facilitate much of the processes that exist in the country. One of the biggest challenges that we have in here is that much of our government and whatnot is very paper-based. And even organizations and whatnot, they also operate on a paper-based way, which means that we're not really tapping into the potentials of the data that we have, and we're not able to use them in a more centralized way in which we're able to make better data-driven decisions or to plan for projects in a more data-driven way. So I think right now, one of the, just from where I'm sitting and where the challenges that I'm seeing when it comes to basically understanding what is the innovation that is needed is lack of data, unfortunately.
Right.
And I think this is one of the main things in which actors globally and nationally need to work on, is to utilize the existing technologies that are around data management, around understanding data, and around making data-driven decisions, plans, projects, and whatnot. And it also helps us to remain accountable for ourselves and also for the people that we're serving. And from a purely business perspective, it also really helps you to understand the impact that you're trying to do. How much are you tackling into the supply and demand? How much are you utilizing the resources that you have? It can help you to measure, like, am I the most resource efficient as it is? Can I become more environmentally friendly or resource efficient and whatnot? But that cannot happen unless we really understand the data that we need and we analyze the data that we have.
Absolutely. So this is where, like AI can play really, really important role, because this is something which is sometimes mundane and people really don't want to do it. So having this kind of cool technology always helps. So AI is something which is really promising, at the same
Yep.
time a bit riskier as well, because
Yeah.
it requires a lot of data to be fed into the system. Right now, the more test is Western centric, because all the data that has been fed into most of the machine learning is all about a Western data. And now, in order to contextualize it, we need more like local data, and this is where the local innovators can play a critical role in terms of training those machine with all these local data. Because the other day I was playing around with this DALI 2, which is one of the open AI
Yeah.
product, and I was asking with some keywords DALI to hey, can you make an oil painting of an elephant walking in the street of Kathmandu, and it got me really funny results. So because if you ask same thing, like okay, a cat with a hat in a Manhattan street, then it gives really good result. But if you ask a rhinoceros with like Nepali cap walking in Kathmandu, then it gives really funny results. So that's why we are also really looking into how we can feed into all this data into the machine, so that they can have all the local contextualized data, so it's more real open source. So that's how we are thinking. So we are entering to a last bit of this amazing conversation, which I'm absolutely enjoying, by the way, as always.
Yeah.
And how do you see the scene of local innovation in Iraq in 5 or 10 years down the line? Because you guys have been putting a strong foundation in this domain, especially promoting the local innovators, as well as connecting them with the humanitarian actors, as well as with the community to solve some of the pressing problems, especially more around agriculture, as well as with you told me the other day around the plastics as well. So so many cool things are happening right now, and I'm sure this is going to be a strong foundation for the this new Iraq, what we are looking into, full of promises, full of positivity, full of energy of young people. So how do you see this innovation setting 5 years or 10 years down the line?
I would have to say it very much depends on what is going on within this year and next year. So when it comes to creating change and whatnot, it's very important that multiple actors are
Right.
also aiming towards the same thing. It takes a village and all of that jazz. And the issue is, I would have to say, is that because of the change in the context and the country, unfortunately, from a global setting, not everyone is seeing that Iraq is a priority. But it's overlooking the fragility that is within the economic side of the country that's been around for several decades. And I think like what's it's going to look like 5 to 10 years, it very much depends heavily on the prospect for this year and next year, because the challenges within the country are a lot, and is effort, but there needs to be a collective of collaboration. There needs to be more organized effort placed into really building the infrastructure around innovation and entrepreneurship or economic recovery overall in the country. And it's I have I'm mostly optimistic, but I also have, like, speaking from as a local, not as someone who's born and lived here all my life. I have a lot of optimism, but at the same time, I see a lot of challenges as well. And I wish I can be much more optimistic, but realistically speaking, I would say that there's a long way ahead, and it's not something that people can go through on their own. There needs to be a collaborative support around this. And I have to say, looking this year and whatnot, I see a lot of movement towards agriculture and supporting small producers and whatnot. And not only from Oxfam, but also from multitude of other organizations, and that's been quite optimistic. Because now we're thinking right from a national perspective, people are thinking long term, and it's
Right.
important we continue thinking long term, especially when it comes to supporting economic recovery. We cannot rely on like small grants here and there. No, there has to be a system
Hmm.
that is sustainable and that is scalable.
Absolutely, because we all have to do our part. So definitely, there are so many different layers of external actors that determine the future, but at the same time, being positive and doing what we really believe in is really going to make a difference. So you
Yeah.
guys have been doing a really, really amazing job, and we all look at you guys and we always get inspired by all the wonderful things what we see in all the Facebook posts as well as all the conversation we have. All right, and that really keeps us going, because when we think about, look, Dua and her team are doing so many amazing job and trying to make a difference in such a fragile context, that means like we can do much better as well. So that's why you guys have been a great source of inspiration for all of us, like who are working under a response innovation lab, trying to make a difference in the community. So you guys have been a really, really amazing source of inspiration for all of us. And thank you for being the inspiration and always, being positive and trying to uh, like face the challenge with all the optimism. And well done to your team, and it has been an absolute pleasure talking about different aspects of innovation today.
Thank you, thank you. And honestly, we all get inspired by each other. And it's very fascinating to see the different methods and the different techniques that each one of us takes to reach the same goal. Like we all have different routes, but the objective is the same. And I really thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. And we look forward to see the others as well, and hopefully to continue to inspire and to be inspired.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much, Duha, for your time, and as well as sharing all these brilliant insights and stories of innovation. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, take care. Bye bye.
Bye.